Hi there, and welcome once again to Peninsula Players Presents the History of Peninsula Players Theatre. Audie, how are you today?
I'm doing good.
Excellent, excellent. I'm doing pretty good myself. And we're going to talk about a couple of years, 1963 and 1964. And again, just leading up to this, in 1961, the theater came under new ownership and with new producers that got the organization more organized and together. And in 1962, we talked a lot about the Peninsula Players Theatre being a launchpad for talent and some extraordinary success stories. That continues, I think, throughout all of its history. Um, and as we're going forward, we'll be doing bigger chunks and we'll be sort of more reviewing than going like day to day, which we have in the past. Because, for example, in 61 or in 1960, there were so many things that happened
It
right
was
on top of it.
crazy. Yeah, it was just chaotic.
Yeah, yeah. And now it's smoothing out going forward. So in 1963, the Peninsula Players Theater Foundation is formed and become, yeah.
Right. And it was something that they had hoped to do once the theater was purchased by Kenneth Corot. He said they'll create a foundation. But for the first couple of years, they were experimenting with it being more of a commercial theater with the um, after show and the Bayview Lodge and everything else. But it didn't really bring in enough revenue to do that. So Peninsula Players then Foundation Inc. was established, board of directors assigned, and they hired and assigned Jim McKenzie to be the producer. And this agreement leases the theater from Mr. Corot and his group. So Mr. Corot owns the theater and the foundation leases it, and they continue to lease the property and rent it for the next 3 decades
Mhm.
as we move forward.
Oh, and they also created something they're calling the Players Club.
That's right. They're still using the lodge after the shows, and for a membership fee of $1 per year, people can come in after the performances, meet the cast, get some refreshments, and still kind of operate in that social function.
And once again, we have Gene Bolan and Jim McKenzie as the producers. Gene Bolan being the one that's on site, on
Mhm.
property, and Tom Connors as the general manager. And he stays around for quite a while.
He does. He's around until the late 70s as well. So this is Tom Connors' first season as general manager, but he's been with them as an apprentice, as a house manager, helping to take care of the gardens. He's a real horticulturist, and he in his bios always says he's responsible for the gardens. And eventually he leaves Peninsula Players to run a flower shop. So he really does have a passion for gardens. And taking care of those and helping with that, as well as uh, having spent so much time in Door County himself as a youth, he has a real connection to the community as well. So that Gene and Jim and the Corrodes can entrust that there is somebody who's part of the Door County population, environment to continue and maintain Peninsula Players.
And this year, in the box office and for PR, he starts using some college grads.
Right. They're looking for apprentices to help run the theater, and they're using young, fresh students out of programs to build up their skills. And so not only on stage and in backstage areas, but also now in administration, they're starting to bring some youth in
Mhm.
and people in to hone their skills as well.
And as I mentioned, Jean Bolan is the on-site producer. She's, acting, directing, casting,
Mhm.
and I think this year she acts in the first show,
Mhm.
Take Her, She's Mine, and directs and acts the Mad Woman of Chaillot later on. And her kids are around, right?
They are. So the children are all there, and part of these 2 seasons, they're assisting in some duties. So they're helping to usher, and handing out playbills. Or there's a quote in one article that Amy would ask people, "Can I help you to the box office?" And she would escort people to the box office who needed some assistance. So it's a wonderful magical playground for them to grow up in.
And as Amy said in the last interview we just did with her, she said it wasn't, they didn't usher because it was for their benefit. They needed them.
They needed them, yes.
Yes. Thank goodness we have volunteers today.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And going into this season, then we had a connection. We turned into a sculpture garden.
We did. Madeline Turtolo continues to be a friend of Peninsula Players, and her director, who's also an instructor at UW Wisconsin,
Mhm.
Ted, has assembled 9 different metal sculptures throughout the property for patrons to view pre-show, during intermission, a little bit after the show. So the ambiance of the lighting is still in the gardens. That's still being used and affected. But now there's also these amazing sculptures, and they're taller than you and I. So there's one called Icarus Ascending that has a few pictures in the newspaper that I was able to locate, and so it's just a real neat opportunity. So before our neighbors Edgewood Orchard had their sculpture garden, we had some of these exciting sculptures.
Yes. It's cool. So we go into the season, and again, it's 9 shows, one a week. We did our
Yep.
first Neil Simon,
Mhm.
and that replaced what was to be a musical called Salad Days, but that didn't happen.
It didn't, and it was a combination of trying to cast the musical and the excitement that they could get this production of Neil Simon's right off of Broadway. They were going to be the first theater to produce it outside of New York. So,
With that, and that was Come Blow Your Horn.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, in this season, again, once had a great deal of variety. We have some very interesting shows by like the Mad Woman of Chaillot, Zeus Story, and The American Dream 2-1X by Edward Albee, fairly serious
Yes.
satirical pieces. Night of the Iguana by
Mhm.
Tennessee Williams. We do have a murder mystery, Shot in the Dark. And then the rest are comedies.
It was, yeah, they're entertainment and highly enjoyed by the audiences, including the dramas. Everybody was really enthusiastic for the performances.
Yes. And I think, again, there, you speaking of community involvement with Tom Connors, there was some with the Mad Woman of Chaillot. They were seeking some people.
There were. So Tom put a plea out to the community, not only for costuming pieces like old clothes for the characters to wear and things that might be in people's attics, from feather boas to ostrich hats, but they also needed a juggler. And so they put, he called the papers. Is anybody out there interested in juggling? Give me a call. We'll talk.
And I saw that Mr. Rappaport, who was the technical director, could juggle, and he would do it if they found no one else. But
Right.
he said he wasn't that great. When I looked at the program, he ended up doing it.
Oh,
So we managed. There weren't
yep.
jugglers out there. Um, and also going into this season, we have a whole bunch of new company members. And I think you noted that in a way, a lot of these new company members were different in that they were more seasoned.
They really were, and as I was exploring their careers and prior to that, there was a real connection to Lee Strasberg and the Actors Studio in New York
Mhm.
with this season as well. So including a director, Paul Merton, who came in, as well as Clint Kimbrough and Ralph Waite and Pat Randall. They were all part of that, and they came out to Door County for the summer and then returned to New York and continued their careers afterwards. And including with Ina as well, she had performed more than 15 roles on television in television playhouse plays prior to even attending or coming to Peninsula Players in 1963. So they were just, and she'd been in 2 Broadway shows. So it was just, they're really well seasoned as young juvenile performers in their early 20s, along with the seasoned company members. So the apprentices that were there that season were really working with polished professionals.
And as you said, these are people who went on and had even their careers blossomed and continued.
They did. Clint, when he left Peninsula Players, became one of the first company members of the Lincoln Center for its inaugural season, and he became really artistically associated with Elia Kazan and performed in several movies. And he even had shot a film prior to joining Peninsula Players, and with Anthony Quinn and Shirley Booth. I think it was called Hot Spell. And then he went on to do another one with Shelley Winters in the 70s called Bloody Mama, which was about Ma Baker and the boys. And then there's Ralph Waite, who everybody may be familiar with from the Waltons, or if you're fans of NCIS, he plays Mark Harmon's dad in that production. But he didn't start his career in acting. He came to acting late in life. He went to school to become an ordained minister. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister. And one of his parishioners was the actor Bill Hayes, who stars on Days of Our Lives, and he's been on that show for decades. But Bill was going to a workshop to do some scene reading, and Ralph came along, and they were doing some scenes, and Ralph just kind of, can I do one? And he really got hooked and switched his career. He then became an actor. And Bill would, I think, said in a 1975 TV Guide article that Ralph was a very good minister and really good at giving sermons and really performed well. So he could see him having a successful career in that. And so then Ralph went on to have, I believe, 8 roles on Broadway. He was nominated for several Emmys, not just for his role as Papa Walton, but also in the miniseries Roots. He was a slave trader ship captain.
It's not so strange to me that he wanted to be a minister, because early on in my career, one of the actors I worked with in a production of The Rainmaker, Jerry Walling, was a Jesuit priest, and the Jesuits wanted him to pursue that professionally, which is really cool.
So yeah, and he did return closer to his retirement, and later years he returned to being a guest minister in Palm Desert, I believe, in California, where he retired to.
Nice. And so again, the company is all housed in a very camp-like setting.
Yes, very much, which we still are. So
Yes.
there's the 13 buildings still scattered all over property, and a couple of the company members, Maggie Magerstadt, has purchased a lot of property just a few lots down, so she can walk to the theater for rehearsals and then go home. And then Jeanette Leahy, who's with the company as now as a leading lady, she's purchased a property a little further down from Maggie's on Juddville Road as well, and is building a home. And a couple of the other members of the company have rented cottages or purchased them close to the theater as well for their families and themselves. So that's kind of how they were able to manage with some of the housing for those 2 seasons, was those
Because
advantages.
one of the buildings we did not have yet was the new dorm.
Right.
Which
Yep.
comes
So they're
later.
still bunking together in the old dorm. So there's 2 to 3, 4 people in a room, as well as maybe some other cabins,
Summer camp.
including the summer camp.
And also during this season, there was a benefit night for a Sturgeon Bay group.
There was the riflemen who had been winning target shooting competitions for the past few years. They were the national champions. And the year prior, they were not able to travel to the competition because they didn't have enough travel funds. So as a benefit for during a performance of Night of the Iguana during the run of the show, they were selling tickets to the general public as a fundraiser to earn their travel money to go compete in the shooting competition.
Oh,
that
nice.
summer.
Nice. And speaking of Night of the Iguana, that was the seventh show during the season. That was a show for which Dan Scott came back, who had been having an amazing career.
Yes, just very in California as a character actor, which was his home state. He was a California youth, and so he's returns for this production as well as Leo, and this was one of Leo's last Broadway roles as well. So he comes back to Peninsula Players for the season and reprises his role from the production of Night of the Iguana, and also helps stage and direct it.
Hmm. And and as I said, this is Dan's last show, and he continued, of course, to work in all of
Mhm.
those fields going forward. But one of the things he said I thought was nice to hear was on he did a interview in 1980, and he said, "Outside of my birth, this place has had the most profound effect on my whole life. It more or less sealed my interest and determination to become an actor, and that is all I've ever done."
Yes,
That's
and Dan did have a very active career. So I know we've mentioned he was on Trapper John MD for a reoccurring role. He also had a reoccurring role on the Mod Squad for during its run,
remember that.
and he also appeared about 5 or 6 times on Perry Mason as different characters. So it was really fascinating to kind of look at his career and all the different television shows, from Bonanza to Mannix to the $6 Million Man, just all
Well,
of these.
sounds like he did really well. I hope he saved his money.
Yes.
So, so then we go into 1964, and for some reason, which we can't figure out, this is the year they're celebrating the theater's 30th anniversary.
Right. So I know there's over the years we always have these conversations. Well, do we count the seasons because we didn't perform during World War II? How do we so amongst ourselves in the office, we determined, well, 1935 is the year we started, so we're going to go from there.
Right.
So as long as you and I have been there, that's how we figured it out. How
Yes.
they were figuring it out, I don't know either, but they decided 1964 they'd celebrate the 30th anniversary, and they put together a souvenir booklet
Hmm.
to put out. So they had determined to do that at the end of the 63 season. And it's one of the things that occasionally you can find in a thrift store, Indoor County, or an antique store, but it's really lovely and put together very nicely to pay homage to everything that's happened up until then.
Hmm. Which was 30 years is a good
30
long
years.
time, if it
Yep.
was 30. And again, we're going into 1964. We're under the same leadership team,
Mhm.
same format with 9 shows, one per week, except this year they do a musical.
They do, and I think what they figure out is that musicals are more popular, so they know ahead of time to schedule it for 2 weeks,
Mm,
and that becomes a little bit more consistent as we go forward too. So and that's what then they plan. And so they're gonna do, My Fair Lady, and again, it's one of these, opportunities to have auditions and get some of the locals involved in some of the roles. And Tom Birmingham continues to be a part of the company in that aspect of playing small parts in productions.
and not
And
just looking for actors, but looking for musicians.
yes, and musicians as well. So, and it really becomes a really exciting for the community as well to be a part of
Yeah.
and of these productions.
And the wonderful thing we know today about Door County is that music is a huge part of the culture of the county, and some fabulous musicians out there
Hmm.
now. Um, and then during the fourth show, but for whom Charlie, there was a special event with children.
There was 37 young people from the Green Bay Center Young People's Theater came to present a children's show. So they had a one day afternoon event, and the kids came up And that year they were going to do the show The Indian Captive. And because Chief Oshkosh was just down the road, the Menominee chief, he came and greeted all of the youth, and that was exciting for them
Mm.
to see that, and it was exciting for the audience members. And it was just really nice to have that energy and that youth on that property, that here were these kids, they were in a theater and did this performance, and it was exciting for the parents as well as the company members, just to see the exuberance of 37 young people doing a show.
And that makes it quite an impression on kids. Yeah.
It does, and it's really exciting for I know when we give backstage tours when we were open, that we would show some of the youth that would be doing musicals come and have a backstage tour, and it's very nice opportunity for us to have conversations with them, as to let them question the stage manager, let them talk to one of the carpenters, what is it that they do, and give them that opportunity to see that you can have a career in
Hmm.
this.
And we're always happy to share that knowledge and
Mhm.
answer any questions people have about stuff like that,
Yep.
because we do want to encourage the next generation of theater practitioners
We do.
and people who enjoy theater. But it was also during this season that I think this is one of the strangest PR things that they did was they celebrated the 500,000th patron.
Yes. And how they figured out who it was, I'm not sure, because I think Caroline threw some of the records in the bay. So, but they came up with it. And on August 5th, 1964, Gerald Martin of St. Louis, Missouri, was awarded the 500,000th ticket purchaser.
500,000.
Half a million.
Amazing. And that's before there were computers.
Right.
So, well, well, I'm glad we made it that far. Yay. Um, and also, there were a couple of people we wanted to chat about, Carl Benson and Dunya Rathbone, who came in this year, right?
They
And
did. Right. Yeah. Dunya returned, but Dunya's returning to perform. So between her absence and returning, she has been on Broadway as a dancer and working with Sid Caesar. And she's also been performing on television and on Ed Sullivan's show as a background dancer. So her training in ballet has really parlayed into this. And she returns to Peninsula Players to continue to hone her onstage skills, and also is working as Tom Connor's executive secretary. So it's a balance between administration and performing. This is also the year that Carl Benson joins Peninsula Players, and we're going to see him years ahead as well. But Carl has a very active career, had been in several Broadway shows before coming to Peninsula Players, and made his Broadway debut with Mae West. And Catherine was great.
And I actually, in my time at the Players, had a chance to do a show with Carl. We did a walk in the woods together,
Right.
and it was really neat to work with an old pro like that, because he was terrific.
And so he brings a real seasoned quality as well to all of the apprentices and young ingenues who will continue to come through
And
Players.
speaking of seasoned, in the souvenir booklet, one of the things that they celebrated in there was what they called the Golden Dozen.
Yes, and they were really honoring those who had spent 12 or more seasons with Peninsula Players and really helped shape that foundation. Something that we've kind of covered all the way till now is these particular people. So it was exciting, they honored Helen Casey Bragdon and Leo Lucker and Bill Munchow and the Fisher family and Jean Leslie and Maggie Magerstadt,
Mhm.
and just to pay tribute to these performers and those who set the foundations upon which we are now going to continue to build.
Mhm. And you mentioned Bill Munchow. I thought a nice way to cap today's interview was with, he wrote a letter in 1964, and this is some of what he said. He sent this to Jim McKenzie, and he wrote, "Once a Peninsula player, always a Peninsula player." And of course, now we say that all the time: once a
Yep.
player, always a player. And he goes on to say, "Why this should be, I can guess. I still consider it home. And wherever I go, whenever I run into a Peninsula Player alumnus, I find that the feeling is shared. Why should this be? Perhaps it's because here is where so many of us got our start in the business. Perhaps too, it's because in 10 summer weeks of living together, of working together, of putting on 10 shows in that short time, of practically doing the impossible, it creates a spirit, a bond almost akin to that of soldiers in battle." And we certainly know that well, don't we?
Yes, me too.
Yes. And he goes on, part of it is the sheer beauty of Door County, the genuine feeling of welcome, of friendliness, and saying, "I'm happy and proud to be a member of the club." And I think that's something both you and I feel also.
Oh, very much, very
Yes.
much. And it's a feeling of home and family.
Hmm.
And I think that sense that we create amongst ourselves creates a very friendly atmosphere when we greet patrons.
Hmm.
And so and that's why they like to return as well. So
Yes. So Audie, thanks again. We were covered 2 years this year.
yes, we did.
And next time, we're hoping to go from 1965 to the end of the decade, 1969, in bigger chunks as we go forward, because a lot of this is, we get into a great pattern of working from here
Yeah,
on.
we do.
Anyway,
Thanks,
good
Greg.
to see you again. Thanks, Audie.
Thanks, Greg. You have a lovely week.
And you too. And we will see you next time.